All right, so that is recording. So it looks like we're ready to begin. So hello everyone, I'm Tim. Sort of person here at the Old Sword Club who normally runs lessons, but tonight we have a special guest speaker. We have Mosh from like all manner of groups. Actually, Mosh has got a pretty intensive, martial arts CV. I think he did full contact unarmed martial arts for many years, then moved into HEMA, has been involved in the LARP scene, doing everything from small parlor LARPs to large battles for about 6 years now or so. Has taught HEMA at Fitzroy College of Arms, and just done all sorts of cool stuff. Does like small sword and saber and sword and buckler and side sword and spadroon and now like rapier and longsword. So yeah, Mosh is going.
That's Woody's influence.
You don't want to admit that you've gone mainstream. But anyway, tonight, So anyway, tonight Mosh is going to be telling us about all the cool things that doing LARP can teach us in the HEMA community, and possibly also shedding some light on what HEMA can teach LARP if it goes the other way. But anyway, take it away, Mosh. I'm going to stop talking.
Okay, thank you so much, Tim. So yeah, I really like swords. That's what's kind of done all this. Like, it started with when I had a plastic toy katana that I got from the Whittlesea show, which is like a county fair. And I got in a lot of trouble from my parents because I ran around outside when I was like 5 years old and just cut all the flowers off all the agapanthus. They had so many agapanthus and there were no flowers left at that afternoon. Since then, I've really liked swords. And we shouldn't separate too much all our opportunities to play with swords and all the cool environments and the ways that we can actually explore and play with these things, because we're really blessed that we have the technology and the environments to do these things quite safely and kind of do above and beyond what people could before, which is really neat to me. I started my real sword journey with LARP, live action roleplay, which for anyone who doesn't know, is kind of like if you play D&D with your friends, but then also wore costumes and then tried to act everything out. And then instead of rolling dice, it's if you can do it or if the rules let you do it. This can change drastically what the physics of the world are. So we get to play with the physics of what we interact with, which is really neat. And we get to play these things like children. And children get to learn things, and children aren't punished for wanting to learn and wanting to explore and do all these really fun things. They're just kind of left to do their thing a lot of the time, hopefully. We get to play conflict. We get to play tenacity. We get to play violence. We get to play stress and joy, overcoming war and trauma. We get to play rivals. We get to play love, and getting to play these topics is really special. Now, what this can teach those of us who actually really enjoy violence as a scholarly pursuit is a really special topic to me now, because I've gotten to experience a lot of things that when I tell my friends who do HEMA, they look at me and go like, hey, that's kind of what I wanted out of HEMA. I wanted to be the great swordsman. I wanted to be this great warrior. I wanted to be Conan the Barbarian. And you kind of get to actually live that and experience it, and then apply what you study and what you enjoy and get to actually live that 1,000 times, 100 times, even once, which is really neat. There is a constant reminder when you play these games that most people who play the LARP game are white belts, and there's nothing wrong with that. So you actually really get good at fighting white belts, something that every experienced martial artist kind of goes through either a period of time where the only way they deal with white belts is by telling them they're wrong, or they finally pull it together and go like, wait, no, how do I actually beat someone who has no idea what they're doing and is probably going to hurt me or themselves trying? So you learn all this amazing control and amazing stuff that makes you a better teacher and a better fighter. And you also get to practice and see whether war and violence is forgotten from our fencing, where it has tremendous impact on the thoughts of the writers of our craft. Two examples that I really enjoy, actually 3 examples. Silver's slow hand. A lot of people who've started with silver have gone away from it and seen renditions of silver's slow hand where it's kind of sometimes cutting in absence, which good fencing tells us not to do that when we shouldn't like enter with it. But if you walk up to someone who's holding a big shield, like no one's taught them how to hold center line, and you suddenly slowly start putting a blade towards their shoulder, they're going to flinch. They're going to move. They're going to react almost like what we'd expect someone to react to a live blade with. And all of a sudden you get to play that game. Instead of everyone who kind of knows better and just goes, yeah, thrust with opposition, got you, buddy, done. We get to experience those things that when it was written on paper and taught to people, it kind of worked and there was a reason why they did it. Another one is the story of never give a Scotsman your never let a Scotsman give you their Taj, where you would have the clan chiefs who would have a quarrel with someone and they would challenge him to a sword fight of some kind or whatever. Using a sword seemed like the smart thing to sort out this grief. And they would go, going to war is my sport, what I do. I want to see if you can at least live up to your transgression or live up to the point you wish to prove, and I'll help you with that. Well, let's make it fair. And they'd hand them their Taj. Here, let's make this fair. I'll just use my claymore. You use a sword and Taj. Let's make this fair. And people wouldn't give up on that. They'd be going, oh, yeah, cool. I get an advantage, neat. So while they stand there, maybe only done a few lessons in their life, maybe have been to war or done officer training or something like that. They stand there, they feel more secure, they feel more safe, they feel more comfortable than they should. And the clansman would suddenly lurch with his point towards the eye, and the other person would react by bringing their shield up. And as soon as that would go up, then a cut in absence straight into the leg and leave them be. Things which, if you study broadsword, you may learn about and see, but you kind of only ever get to do it to white belts. All of a sudden, you can start seeing where that actually flourishes on a field and where that can be what saves you and your friends. This funny little trick of a clansman. The other is from a French contrapoint manual called Vauville. Written by a man called Vauville. And he did French spadroon. One of his first plays was heavily criticized by French fencing at the time. But this was French sport fencing against someone who claimed to be a teacher of soldiers, of officers. One of the first plays was an inside to inside, suddenly lurching forwards with the point. Now, usually, a good thrust with opposition or a good cut with opposition could deal with that. The issue is that you suddenly have a live blade being put straight towards your face. And they would react. And as they would react, you hook with the back of your blade and cut through. These 3 things that I've just mentioned are all things that kind of thrive on battlefields because survival is more important. And you get to play that. We get to play that like children, see where it shines. You get to play that and see what actually is really good to teach beginners and to teach new warriors, people who want to be that shining soldier, that shining knight, that amazing ranger. You get to teach them these things that we first would say, that's ridiculous. Why would you show someone that? And you get to watch it shine and shine and shine, because there is a big difference between warfare and Sal. There is a principle called loss aversion. If anyone does any studies on just people in general, people don't like losing things more than they like the option or risk of winning. I'm not going to discuss that. Let's just pretend that is true for the sake of the points. All these techniques work on loss aversion, where a lot of our competition and training works on winning is important, which you kind of like lose a bit of your loss aversion. You're like, nah, I'm pretty sure I can do this with opposition, or I can do this in a single tempo. You can get disgustingly good with that stuff, but also being able to play these games is really important, especially when the other person doesn't respect what's happening. So all of a sudden you're on the back foot of loss aversion and then trying not to die. Those kinds of single tempo attacks, those kinds of those things that kind of beat the loss aversion thought are also really inorganic. And that's why a lot of people, when they go from HEMA into LARP, actually kind of struggle. Because they're like, well, why don't you not want to get cut? Because my armor works, or my armor kind of works, depending on the rules. So they get to not care. And you have to deal with that. And you have to learn how to apply your fencing to either new physics or fairly normal human physics. And, oh, I can't just lunge and thrust. I can't just beat just you. I can't do the things that I know I could deal with a single person with, because you have friends. You have pole arms. You have band pistols. You have bows and arrows. You have shields. All these things that kind of mess with what we study and where we prioritize things. Our weapons that we utilize are foam. They have no stopping power, which is actually really nice, because we all want to be able to go to work in the morning, and we don't want to be beat up from playing these games. If you want to be beat up from playing these games, we've got different games for that, and that's okay. But even our steel swords have flex and a blunt to try and keep us all safe and okay. And they only have stopping power in really particular ways. And if your toys don't do that, you start wondering why your friends don't want to actually do the sword fighting with you. So we already play a game where we kind of need to emotionally beat someone. They need to receive such a hit, such an impact, that they go, yeah, got me. We do that in HEMA. It happens in SCA, it happens in Bohurt, happens in LARP. Now, where some people of strong will not register or emotionally accept a wound to make sure theirs lands. Sometimes people are assholes, and your wound that could kill a horse apparently didn't affect them at all. And the violence continues, and you have two choices. Scream to the gods of your physics, your spiritual gods, or your friends who help run that event. Or they accost you, continue keeping yourself safe, and finish the fight. A really important lesson for everyone who's studying this in a more historical way, in a more applicable way, in a world without sword fighting now. And then that same very person may just have chainmail underneath their doublet, and were ready to take that blow just to make sure they could run you through. I've been able to do that moment at a LARP. I was playing a character that was accosting a large group of people. And a good friend of mine who I train with, Hugh, he did some backroom deals to actually borrow someone's chainmail from their character for this final fight to be able to deal with me. Because in this LARP that we did, armor worked amazing. So he could rely on it, and he could rely on his armor to keep him safe. And the biggest, dumbest grin as he lunged like a madman, knowing damn well that I would slip back, hopefully not get hit, and cut his arm, as his rapier went straight into my chest. And I wonder why he didn't go down. And I hit him again, and I hit him again, and he's teeing off on me something fierce, as he's got the biggest smile, and I see through the gaps of his doublet his chainmail I didn't even know he had access to. And that's what kept him safe, and he used that to accost me. Yeah, that's an awful situation to be in. And all of a sudden, I haven't actually taken in everything I could have. I went straight to violence. He went straight to violence. And his upper hand destroyed anything I could have planned, sadly. So in that moment, he definitely beat me. You get these kind of really neat moments in LARP that sometimes we dabble with in HEMA and other games. I refer to it all as games because we're playing and learning like children in good, healthy ways. But you kind of get to really experience that moment of like, huh, I wonder how many people lived that and died on it. Huh, that's really spooky. So from that very same game, I had a big Frenchman, big bombastic Frenchman, trying to stir me up for me to accost him. And as he got closer and closer and closer, you could tell how much he didn't want me to accost him by the physical meters he had between us. Doesn't matter what bravado, what they say or what they do at that point, you can tell the fear and trepidation by how many meters a person keeps between you and them at all times. As soon as he just got in distance, I started sprinting forwards. The Frenchman, believing that he could get his sword out of his scabbard quick enough to deal with whatever I could throw, suddenly grabbed it. It wasn't 21-foot rule thing, like kind of distance, but he was pretty close. And the fear that he showed after all that bravado as he turned and ran, because his damn sword was stuck in the scabbard. All that confidence, all that bravado drowned in the sudden realization of, oh, it didn't work the way it should have. And he ran. And as he ran, my sword went straight to his back. He slipped in the gravel and wrecked half his costume. And I feel so bad. And he treats that as one of his favorite moments because of that lesson that he learned. Don't walk in half cocked because you may not be able to get it out. And that's something that actually turns up a lot in LARP because human bravado and the search of a good story kind of muddies everything a little bit in really neat ways. Like the 21-foot rule. We know this as if you have a gun in your holster and someone is within 21 feet of you with a weapon or not, they will most likely be on top of you faster than you can pull it out, aim it, and fire. The same thing happened with swords, I believe, because I've lived it a bunch of times. I've sat there and gone, I can't get that. Sorry, that's someone ordering food. I've lived that a few times where you can't get your weapon in hand fast enough. So you can't do the things you know you can do. And then you feel like Buzz Lightyear with years of academy training wasted. And you get to experience those moments where we're very blessed that we get to fence and duel already. But a lot of people had to figure out ways to get past that, how to make sure that they were safe. And all of a sudden, the ways that people tell you how to draw your sword stick in your mind instead of being afternotes in your fencing. Thank you for that, Gareth. That should make a bit more sense. I use feet a lot, just in general, so I forget. For anyone who can't see the chat, 21 feet is about 6.5 meters, 6.4 meters. And then you get these weird moments where if you've done dagger play or something like that. I was in the top floor of a casino, and this was a medieval-esque casino. It was a fantasy thing. I was on the top floor. It was empty, only the people who were working were there. And I was there to help guard it because we were pretty sure another group were going to attack it or rob it even. All of a sudden, these Teutonic nuns come up. Und hallo! Ooh, look at this. And they wanted to gamble. These nuns had no business being up there. And this group of nuns come up. And then, after pleasantries and enjoyment, they start screaming, "This is heresy," and pull guns straight from out under their dresses, aiming at everyone. Now, these guns are rubber band guns. They've got surgical tubing bands, and you pull, it goes twang. And I experienced one of the spookiest things that can happen when someone pulls a gun on you. Watching it misfire and fire directly to their left, and their hearts sink as all I had was the dagger in my hip, and I'm already encroaching upon them. I walk forwards, have to stab this poor nun. Step off to the right, go to the next. Step around a post as other shots are being fired. Stab the third, then the fourth. Almost everyone who was working, there was one other person still alive, almost everyone was on the ground withering from wounds. And then two big Teutonic knights walk up and ask what's going on. And they know damn well. The adrenaline through my heart and through my body at that moment was akin to some of the awful violence I had growing up. But everyone was safe. Everyone was okay. No one was actually hurt. And then watching that knight not realize the 21-foot rule as he's standing in front of me, go to draw his sword, and I suddenly had to leap on a knight with nothing but a dagger and then stab his friend in the back while he went to attack my friend. This is a nice memory because we're all friends, we're all safe, no one's hurt. There was a lot of fencing that could have been utilized there that may not have been applicable. But what I'd learned from fencing was take initiative. And being put in such a moment to practice taking initiative is an absolute blessing. When you can clear a room of people with nothing but hatred and wanting to kill you, with nothing but a dagger, and practice that safely, that's a really neat thing to practice, and something that a lot of us wish we could practice. I mean, it's pretty badass. Then one of the next events, I've got like a list of stories I'm just going to go through for some of these lessons. Actually, would people like to ask any questions or have any small statements? I would suggest putting them in the chat and I'll read them out. Or we can unmute, I'm not too sure.
Yeah. Either's fine. I think Mark's had his hand up for a little while, and I've been meaning to mention it to you.
Oh,
I don't know
yep.
if that's Mark wanting to ask a question or Mark saying hi, but Mark, do you
I
have a
can't
question?
see many
That's cool.
images.
Over here.
So.
Yeah. Over here. Okay. One of the things. Hey, you got my.
Yeah, we
Okay.
can hear you.
Yeah, cool. One of the things that you talked about earlier on was one thing that I'm very interested in LARP, and love to have anything that you can share about this topic. Is that one of the things I see that HEMA can't do is it can't give you any of the context of an engagement. One of the things that I actually try to point out to students from time to time is like every single antagonistic situation is radically different. Every single one is radically different. Like you have radically different goals in every single one, you know. The loss aversion thing is a massive thing in one context and not in another context, you know. So, but like HEMA, of course, has no way to represent any of the contextual stuff that would radically affect fighting, you know. Like, so could you talk about, like, so to speak, this antagonistic context, you know, how off the top of my head, the first major, it's a big topic, the major points are like how much performing for other people or affects your fighting, because you know because when I'm fighting I'm normally performing for someone, you know. In a medieval or Renaissance context, it's like, that's my lord over there, and I have to really impress him, you know. And yeah, and the similar thing of like how things actually become tense if you're actually looking at loss of your character and whether how that changes your emotional responses. Yeah, cool. That's all I really wanted to talk about.
Yeah. Those are all really good points, and like that is stuff that we do experience through this. I've got Alex. Which LARP rule sets have you got experience in, and which would you recommend to people interested to start coming from HEMA? If you can find a LARP group that kind of have a few people who are already in HEMA or SCA or Bohurt, something like that, kind of also playing that game, they're the ones you kind of want to gravitate towards, because if people have already gone, hey, as someone who enjoys these hobbies, this is neat, I'll go towards it. They're the ones you kind of want to go towards, especially if they can have sway on how the rules are done. If you've got people who are definitely more about the roleplay side, which how dare they be? I really enjoy that stuff. Then they may not have the rule sets to accommodate what you're looking for. So look for things that have big battles, really cool armor, big weapons, and they don't need to shout numbers too much. They're probably going to be your kind of things that you'll find more enjoyment if a scholarly pursuit towards violence is your thing. I hope that helps. How much interaction, modified fencing, challenge, negotiation, bluff, truce, retreat. Oof. Next story. All right. That's exactly. Oh, sorry, Mick. For the shout numbers, it is common for some rule sets of LARPs to, instead of being very technically like with violence, it's like my hit does 5 damage. So when I hit you, I shout 5. My hit does flaming damage because I have a great flaming swords. I shout 5 damage and 6 fire every time I hit you, which becomes a different thing. Try and fence really eloquently in that, and everyone gets frustrated because it goes a bit quick. Also, Gareth was a monster at that, and I will constantly say that. Yeah, lightning bolt, lightning bolt. I've been to LARPs where you scream lightning bolt and it's fun. I don't care what anyone has to say. When you scream lightning bolt and watch someone drop, that's hilarious. But I'll go to, oh yeah, and bows are spooky for that. So that previous moment of Wow, everyone's like writing a lot of stuff real quick, and I apologize. I won't be able to keep track of it all. I'd like to go on to the next story, and I'd like to have an extended conversation after just going through my story lesson things. So I was attacked by orcs in the middle of the street once, and they stole my friend Charlie. That sucked. Well, that happened. We suddenly had them shouting at us. We were actually just going to go somewhere else. They were shouting at us and being duffers. And all of a sudden they grabbed my friend Charlie. And they went to grab my partner Kaya. And me being an idiot, my first thought was, while I'm holding flamberge, this isn't my flamberge. My flamberge is the other side of the room. But a big Montante-sized flamberge was, I'll grab my dagger and try and stab them. That was stupid. Because as I went forwards, I suddenly had a shield boss in my nose. That wasn't actually part of the rules of the game. That was this interstate of freaking out because I was about to shiv them. Fair. And in that moment, I was very lucky that all I got was a bit of a smart eye and, oh, I shouldn't be silly. They're trying to grab my friend. They're trying to grab my partner. They're trying to accost me. I drop my dagger, and then all of a sudden, all these Montante plays where you see people doing Montante swinging, big swings, big arcing movements. And while I'm shouting in my big boy voice for them to leave us alone. And all those movements that you probably wouldn't do in a longsword comp because someone would just go straight down Main Street, make a lot of sense when they've got nothing but small shields, small swords, and loss aversion makes sense, even if they're just silly orcs. Having to clear that way, going around their weapons, and if I get hit, I die. And I had to save my friends. All those movements of big swerves and big, like, whippersnipper kind of swings with your pommels down near your knees. And it's nothing like, it's like this going straight under their shield to clip their legs. Those things make a lot of sense. When you've given the context of small arms getting accosted and you're suddenly and you're lucky enough to be holding a bodyguard weapon, a room clearing weapon, an anti-group weapon. And like, there's how many people get to actually practice that? Especially people who really enjoy Montante, because like it's really cool. But the best we can do is go soft and be nice to each other and try not to break each other's masks. Use one of these. It's soft. It's like bendy. You can get them with hard coins now, which is like amazing. And I can whack my friends with it. And I get to practice those things and get to live all of a sudden like a great sword or someone with a Montante saving my friends. Yeah, you can even get some that are safe to stab with. Like we get these from a place. Canada makes good ones. I can't remember when we get the Ateliers Nemesis ones. I think it's somewhere in Europe. And they're amazing. Yeah, Kalamazoo is like a brand that it makes good stuff. And Ateliers Nemesis make these really cool ones that cost an arm and a leg and you can just go ham. It's great. And it's so much nicer than kind of slow play. Like, yeah, we're playing through the plays. We know about this. Oh, this is how I deal with a group of people who want to hurt me. And I need to use my voice, my posture. I need to use charisma on top of good swordplay to make sure everything turns out in a good, for me, way. Is there any larp equipment that would be good for HEMA practice? So if your school uses buffers in any way, shape or form, Kalamazoo swords are so much better. And even if you want to go a bit more ham, I do these things where I get the Rowling's waster baskets, I cut the whole sword apart, put these baskets on, glue it all back together. You have a broadsword that you pretty much Like a mask is fine and you can go ham. It's so good. So good. The binds are a bit funny. That's it. Like, but for giving it to beginners and like they can actually go intense play and you know that your boffer and pool noodle isn't going to break and like mess up your insurance is amazing. You're looking at currently in Australia, I don't know how many people are not Australian here, to put one of these together in Australia, you're sadly looking at close to 200 a piece. But they last. They last when you bash them into steel. They last when you bash them into flesh. They last when you bash them into anything else. And you can get a couple of years out of a handful of them, and people can just play the game at a high intensity without needing other equipment. What about the Go Now buffers? I have no idea. These are like the closest thing to buffers I've really used, besides ones Ginny made with pool noodles and pipes, which are neat. What about fiberglass? My son got a longsword in that, right? Those can be really cool. Like these have fiberglass cores, but you also want to get something that has hard coins if you really want to do long stuff. The sad thing is, just says play steel with steel, play foam with foam, don't mix and match. That is true. Don't mix them. Or you'll wreck your fun toys. But yeah, you want like coins and stuff because sadly a lot of stuff doesn't do coins at this time. All right. So I've got another story where sometimes our footwork and our application on how we traverse is unique to good flooring. Now, some of us do get to do outside play sometimes and notice how like big a difference that can make. This is a story of a time that I was in a forest fight. And that was really amazing. I, at that time, was also looking at roll and wash because it was I-33 footwork and positioning. And I was doing it with a sword and round shield. Martial larp. And I had someone rushing me. And I was getting rushed through this forest and he's just bashing my shield over and over and over. I can do whatever small nicks I can, but nothing I was doing at that moment was putting him down. I suddenly stood in a hole. I was about a foot deep. That was awful. And if I hadn't been so meticulous with my footwork, if I hadn't been so meticulous, like, no, I want to make this roll and wash footwork work under high duress and violence. And as I stood back, fell in that hole, absorbed it, next step back, came out of the hole. The guy just trying to accost me like really violently, fell in said hole and ate shit. And I got to get out of there. We don't get to practice such uneven ground usually because that's risky. Like, I wouldn't like to practice that every week because I'd do my knee at some point, do my ankle, get hurt. That sounds awful, but experiencing that and going like, really good situational awareness and really good footwork can mean the difference between absolute death and avoiding anything that could have happened. And that's a really important lesson. And you start going like, no, I do everything correct every moment. And if there's a single piece out of line, I can get hurt. I don't want that. And that's what fighting in a forest was able to teach me. And a couple of times where technique was not what saved someone. A friend of mine, he plays a King's Guard in the big LARP event, Bickerley, Canada. He is a very capable fighter and he is a warlord in his own right. He was standing there next to the king and he doesn't speak French. They all speak French there. So when he's told to jump, he jumps, and when he's told to go, he goes. And there was a barbarian across the table. This barbarian suddenly reaches into his pocket, pulls out a knife, and was about to leap over the table and across the king. Simon was able to stop this entire moment by, I think it was this actual claymore that I bought off him, grabbing it here, and holding it straight to the guy's chest. And the whole time thinking, I have no idea how I'm going to fight over this table, but let's see how this goes. Now, due to that loss aversion, due to that sudden threat, due to that, my stick's bigger than yours, buddy, are we going to play this game? Actual all issues were stopped there and then. The king stands up, giggles a little, and pushes Simon's sword down, grabs the dagger off the barbarian, puts it on the table, and says, "We will continue talking now." All of a sudden, he put himself in the situation of, I don't know what to do with this. And luckily, he at least did what he could. And it stopped anything else from happening any further. Another instance where actually technique and training kind of saved me when it really shouldn't have. I was walking down an alley of tents, and suddenly I hear someone who was a friend of mine outside of the game, but of course may not have been my friend at that moment. And I felt a bump on the back of my, like between my shoulder blades. And as I was turning, it was dark, it was spooky, and I get spooked easily because I'm a big idiot. My forearm suddenly bashed into something, and all of a sudden I'm holding a band gun that was about to be shot in my back. Now, due to the rules of the game, I shouldn't have done that. Also, the absolute blessing that I had what I've learned to suddenly be holding a gun that's not pointed at my back. But that's not something I've drilled. That's feel a thing, displace center line, take everything off center line. I should be safe. Let's see what happens. That's some actual fencing thought that kind of saved me in that moment. If it was a real gun, who knows? I would hope I would either pull that off or definitely not doing it. But I could see where the things that have been ingrained in me from training actually get to flourish and shine. Last moment was a friend of mine who was suddenly taken over and was about to leap on me. And all I could muster was grabbing my broadsword by the blade and ice picking him with hopeful opposition of my basket floating in this way to stop his arms coming down and stabbing me. That wasn't technique or skill. That was taking initiative, and that was due to the context doing what I could. And those are the stories I've got at this time. I do have a couple of other tidbits and some afternotes on that. But let's have a conversation first. Anyone wish to speak or anything? I'm going to actually have a quick look through the comments. I try not to get distracted, but my lizard brain doesn't let me, so that explains my pauses.
I've got a question.
Yeah, go for it.
You seem to take this extremely seriously in the scenarios that you're in, which gives you a really, really great advantage in the learning experience, as opposed to some that would take it as a day out fun. It's still fun, but you use it as a combat learning experience, which I think is a really, really good idea.
Yeah, I've been very lucky to practice these things under duress where everyone can be safe, which that's one of the hardest things to do in martial arts, keeping your training partners from getting hurt.
I think the seriousness you take it with is really good.
No, thank you. I'm just going to have a quick look through I keep grabbing the mouse for the other computer. Have I done footwork and period shoes? I have period shoes. I have some cowmouth shoes and I've dyed them red and I love them. They're like proper Landscape shoes. I love them. They are horrific. They are awful. It's nothing but 5mm leather and oh God, that's awful. And like anyone who can do really good footwork in those, that's amazing. And that's why I like wearing Timberlands when I go to LARP. It's like those shoes that's a wild ride, and I feel horrible for anyone who gets stuck in those. I'm just going to quickly scroll up because there's been a bunch of comments. HEMA community sidetrack habits, yes. Spooky bows, yes, we know a thing about that. It's definitely fun to perhaps frustrating when better fighters get singled out repeatedly shot with magic. That is true. Yes, all of a sudden that's like, if you're a warlord, the best thing you can do is shoot the warlord, and then you can't kill your friends who can't shoot the warlord. And then if magic is the same as guns in that context, put the warlord down. Good warlord shouldn't get shot. It's a hard lesson to learn. I've been very lucky that I had an instance where I wasn't paying attention to the archer who had me lined up, and suddenly I hear 5 or 6 of my friends screaming renditions of "Get down, Mr. President," taking the piss out of the situation, tackling me, and like a bunch of shields in front of me as we hear a thud. I was lucky. You can get safe swords. Swords are great. Swords are great to stab with. LARP weapon is around £100 in UK. Yeah, we're looking at about the same in Australia. 5 glass, my son's a long squad in that. Displays, blah, blah, blah. It is really fun to fight in woods at Quest. Quest is like an event that I've spoken about within this, but everything I've been kind of speaking about is from multiple different events. Fighting in 6 inches of mud is also an interesting experience. Really teaches you the importance of where the weight of your foot is. Ooh, yeah. I'm very lucky I've only done mud and water a handful of times, but that's a good lesson to learn because it just tightens up all your movements and you become very efficient real quick, or you're down, you're going down, and it's horrific. Armies fighting in the mud. Yep. Interesting thing, most of the time in HEMA, when running bodyguard drills, the person being guarded is just trying to stay alive. LARP bodyguarding is weird as fuck because the person who's being guarded is usually trying to achieve something. So you kind of see how bodyguarding while trying to control your charge works, right? You're given more context than keep person safe. It's keep person safe, and we have a next tier of things to do. So there's more variables and more things to go on, and you've got more troubleshooting to do while also not getting whacked with a sword. That's really cool to be able to work at that higher caliber and still make everything, and higher intensity, and still make those things work. Often getting shot at, yes, I am. In reality, fencing is never symmetric. Yep. I'm not being able to like, have you done footwork? I had to convince my sparring partner to put cleats in his period shoes as it had no grip and he kept overstepping due to his sliding feet. Oh, that makes my knees hurt. Always prioritize the DPS. Damn it, chef. Shoot any fool who doesn't bring a shield. Thank you, Jacob. Jacob has shot me many times. Brown from experience, shoes without soles are okay on dry grass and dirt. That is true. They suck when the grass is wet though, and you have to be really conservative with how much weight you put on your foot. Right? Conservative fencing is like something that we get to experience and go through. Where are we at? Oh, why do you think there is a resistance from LARPers to engage in HEMA and vice versa? I didn't notice that because I was blasting through and I apologize. Why is there resistance with that? People are duffers on the internet. People are duffers not on the internet. And people remember duffers. People remember their worst experiences a lot better than their favorite. And like everything, if you're given a poor experience, it can actually take a lot of emotional strength to get past that and still look for good things. My first week-long event I went to, I had a terrible experience. And it kind of put me off LARP for a good 2 days. And luckily I had friends and everything to keep me kind of going. And now I'm 6 years later, it didn't put me off that much. There's still people in Western Australia where I avoid, but people are duffers. Why don't LARPers like to go into HEMA? A lot of the time it's not actually what they're looking for. Being able to experience being the great soldier or the great knight sometimes doesn't take needing to be the great soldier, the great knight. Humans are very good at doing things very efficiently, and it's definitely more efficient to be this great legendary officer or knight with bravado and charisma than sometimes it is with actual swordplay. And that's normal. Like, not everyone did swords. There's a reason there's a bunch of really crappy Napoleonic era swords. There's a bunch of officers who knew they were never going to use it and just got the bare minimum to keep their superiors happy, and they have a sword on their hip. And then there were nutcases who went, I'm going to war with this sword, and they spent a lot of money on it. And that's kind of like us. We like that part. Having prestige and an experience without actually having it, I mean, that's definitely more efficient. And if I could get away with not needing the stuff I need, like being able to do the things I do, that'd be a lot easier. And a lot of people going from HEMA want to take it still sincerely or seriously. And I don't blame them. You don't want to run around with lightning bolt. I love that video. And that's fair. I get how the image of that and the way that that can weigh on your image and weigh on the other images can be very important. In the same way it is for LARP, in the same way it is for people. There's a lot of honesty in LARP. In HEMA. There's a lot of needing to be honest with yourself in martial arts. And I don't blame people where that may not be the most important priority of traits to work on in their life. So there will always be a slight overlap, not a complete overlap. Being a fencing laboratory where you should, I like that. I like the idea of HEMA being a fencing laboratory where you test the movements that you see on the manuals. It gives you personal physical insight into what actually was, right? Sword games aren't what I do. I do real martial arts TM. The real fight TM. I love that. Yes. I can see differences when we all just like wacky bats. I love telling people to call any form of swords wacky bats at the moment, just because we keep our sincerity in how we how we perform, but we don't forget that it's funny wacky bats, because like that's how you get lost and forget to enjoy we play with swords. Also, the fandoms often establish identity by differentiation from something similar. So for both HEMA and LARP, a lot of identity is built on not being the other. Right, very fair. Very fair. Being what you are is important. Amazing, right? Battlefield situation, what do you think is the absolute worst system, and why do you think it's fabulous? I have done a full incantata thrust on a friend's breastplate while facing my own line, because I've gone backwards, stabbed him, and kept turning, looked at the stunned look on his face. You can shoehorn it in, damn it. It was really dumb. I should have been. What were hit points?
So Mosh, that last thing you said didn't, or I didn't hear it, and I'd like you to repeat it, at least just for me, if not for everyone else.
Yeah. What was the last thing you did hear?
you mentioned incretardering someone whilst,
Ah,
yes, and
sorry.
like shoehorning Fabris in.
Something about Fabris being terrible.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth. So that's actually a really cool example of where the exceptional for sale play and competition sometimes is going to be struggled to be shoehorned into a battlefield situation. My best bet would have probably been just cut him or stab him. But he was a good friend. And the best thing I could think of in that time was feint at his right shoulder, watch his arm drift open toward it, because most larpers, being white belts, when you feint, they displace themselves. Like that whole theory of displace them off centerline, you have more options than in actual fencing because people will fall for anything. You can displace someone by yelling. It's amazing. As you do that, boom, stabbing right through, straight into the middle of his breastplate, which in this game that this occurred in, armor kind of worked. So if you wear a lot of armor, you kind of have it work for a time and then you fall over. Stabbing him, opposition, feeling the hit of his sword into this basket, feeling the tip fold over into his chest, turning and facing him again after looking at my line as I've done it. Boom, and facing him again. The stun looked on his face, the stun look on everyone else around me as I shoehorned in this thing that had no business being there. And my next move was to, oh shit, swing at a left-handed Viking and watch his sword leave his hand. That wasn't very nice, but he was going to cut me. I should have been cut 100 times, but you can shoehorn in things you shouldn't. And that's like one of the things where sometimes if your character isn't going to die, if you're just going to get hurt and your friends will pick you up later, you can do these things you shouldn't do. And you get to be the superhero, soldier, fighter, super swords wizard you always wanted to be. Why do I think the worst system is Hero Silver? Because you should do Silver if you want to do LARP. You should do Silver if you want to do Battlefield. It's like the newest Battlefield mentality. All these feints, all these like don't die first mentalities is amazing because your soldiers not dying, your friends not dying, you not dying is better than anything you can do to them. Every time. And that's an amazing lesson. Not dying is important. Someone who's happy about the double hit. I have an embarrassing story about playing for this, and I don't want to repeat the embarrassment. That's completely fair. The next comment, distance. Thank you. You're correct. The Silver's first defense, I spent a good year and a half where Gareth started teaching me HEMA, pretty much first defensing people to the point of stupidity, because that's all you can do sometimes. First defense is void with the body, void with the midline to make sure that there are no targets left in distance as you come down on whatever target is still there as they attack. So if they put their arm in distance, hit. If it's going to end up in distance while you slip backwards, it should be in the distance of your sword while they're aiming for a target that probably isn't your sword hand. It works really well. Like, I spent a year and a half fighting backwards, going nothing but backwards, void step, cut their arms. When you have a Viking with a big Valkyrie tattoo on his back because he's that dedicated to it, wearing braces, shins, a big round shield, and he's just going to keep coming and just wear hits, and he can wear anywhere between 5 and 9 hits. You learn really quick to, I need every single hit to be for free. No exchange rates. I'm not trading hits because you will win that game. A lot of people get very good at winning this exchange rate game. I will give 1 to 5 hits or health or whatever your game has to make sure I hit your critical zones and drop you, or I just out DPS you. Silver is amazing for battlefields. Like, it's ridiculous. but you kind of also really get good at giving ground, which gets you yelled at a lot. Straight up run at you while fighting. Good for work and fighting and keeping measure. It can be done while maintaining structure. Yes, correct. Remember the stopping power thing I mentioned before. Sometimes the physics of that world, your weapons don't have stopping power, and it's a great place to practice that, especially if you're doing semi-continuous or continuous fighting for a HEMA tournament. You've got apparently blind and drunk referees, because all referees are apparently blind and drunk. You get very good at like, no, I'm still fighting. I am fighting until I'm not fighting, which sometimes you feel like an asshole doing that in training, but you're not an asshole when you do it when the person in front of you is also doing it. So you get to practice that without making your friends at training salty. I find it stressful. I find it difficult not to escalate, right? You get to practice that not escalating to the point of like silly. I've yelled at people. We've all yelled at people for being duffers. I'm better at not yelling at them than I was years ago because I've practiced it. All right. I've got a couple more things. So I look at Napoleonic warfare a lot because like there were superheroes of warfare in that. Like guns were just strong enough that like armor was starting to kind of not be that great. Also, armoring people and soldiers is expensive, and war is a rich person's game, and more bodies can kind of be better than armor sometimes, almost always. Yeah, right. No, I'm getting distracted by the chat. And you see the traditional hanging ward, or the hanging position, or second, used in Napoleonic warfare constantly. And when you try and use that in fencing, most people overbind it and stab you, or overbind and cut, or they push through and cut. And like you can't really live in that position. You kind of want to float through all your positions. If you sit still, you die. You get a lot of context, even just on faux medieval warfare with pikes and halberds, especially pikes and halberds that don't have stopping power. So they're more like muskets. And you charge someone with nothing but your hanging position, sitting in second or third and just going. Second or third foot position, sorry. And you're going forwards, you displace. You either use your hand if your game lets you, or your arm if your game lets you, or your shield, or your buckler, or your dagger if your game lets you. You displace, and suddenly you're doing quintessential Napoleonic officer against someone with a big bayonet. And you get to like, oh, yeah, don't use hanging against other people. That's fine. That's not built for that. It is built for people with big dumb weapons, and I wasn't meant to be fighting this day. I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time. I've got to be safe and go. It shines. It's amazing. I moved my notes because I hit my keyboard. I apologize for that. So similar wards like Garden or St. George's. Garden is like silver and you point at the rear knee and the point's not in play. This will be wild. It's not a defensive ward. It's an assaulting ward in the same way second or hanging and pointing at the waistband was. St. George's is an inwards guard because most likely humans cut this way to begin with. And you see that with people new to swords in all form of wacky bats. And you just, boom, collect, bind, go. All these things that we kind of know how to mess with each other on because we're all menaces who understand fencing theory. You need those. You need them more than a good inside, good outside, and a good middle. You need those positions because all the options they'll make are completely different to what we'll do in the cell and what we will do when trying to win correctly, because sometimes the goal is to hit you, sometimes the goal is to hit you without getting hit. And we all know how much that sucks to fence against. So those guards prioritize survival opposed to threat. Oh, Jess wants to say a thing. Jess is very good at garden and very good at nuking people who try and do garden. Are we able to unmute Jess because she is good for this? Jess is great for the larp fight as well, especially when she runs around like full imbricata and stabbing people in the chest just straight up.
Yep. So when you've been talking about gardens in a LARP situation, LARP's actually taught me a valuable lesson in how to actually stand in gardens. Because something that's not mentioned anywhere is that if you retract your shoulder blade, suddenly you can see on both sides. And you can't say pull your arm back.
Oh.
Your shoulder blade. Yeah.
Ah,
Smaller side, but yeah.
that's great. And that's something where like trying to apply it in situations that it was more applicable to is like useful and great for troubleshooting. Oof.
Yeah, you'll never need that in a cell, but on a battlefield, it helps to be able to see on both sides.
Yeah. Yeah. You notice I haven't mentioned much about group fighting. And most of my stories are more about where I've gotten to apply most of my HEMA stuff in a civilian context. Let me move my notes, friend. That was actually going to move my next thing, which is great. The assault of the Taj and broadsword, where it really shines. You know, there's like things in like, you know, when you see people fight with a sword and Taj, or like SCA fighting, where they're kind of like tic-tacking at each other, or they're kind of like bouncing on distance. If it wasn't for LARP, I wouldn't have realized like sword and Taj is not a fencing tool. It is a violent assault tool. And when you're doing nothing but going forwards, yes, Lichtenhauer said it too. If you're doing nothing but going forwards, yes, Fabris said that as well. It closes off every line amazing. And you have to suddenly do nothing but take initiative or die. And overbind, cut, go through, displace line, make sure they can't hit on the way in, make sure it's as close to their shoulder. If you can, if your game allows you to touch them with your shield, great. If your game doesn't allow you to touch them with that shield, you try and do this gap because you're a competent fencer and a menace. And you just keep going forwards and you suddenly realize like, oh, a big strapped round shield that just kind of moves wherever you go, oh shit, while assaulting someone is amazing. And you never want to go backwards. A lot of people who try and fence with a sword and Taj, especially in HEMA, try and treat it like a weird buckler. And then all of a sudden it's like, why would I use a Taj? I'll just get hit in the legs heaps. Yeah, because that's not what it's for. And you get to feel the application of, oh, this is no longer civilian-esque like fencing. This is assault training. And then a lot of the lessons, especially the Adoran Society have put together, kind of make sense of their, all the lessons of Taj is to overbind, make their shoulder open up something crazy and smash them in the back of the head. I'm not allowed to do that in HEMA. Almost the same as Montante is not applicable for fencing. And why Longstaff is not applicable for fencing. You get to practice and learn and see these things that we usually can't play. Saying, I don't want to deal with anything on my left side while assaulting. You're not wrong. Just limiting targets like makes your need to compute amazing. Just potential targets. Oh yes. LARP can teach you that survival is super important, especially on the battlefield, especially in a line fight. All of a sudden, those short, sharp little cuts and hits make a lot of sense. Those punch forwards with opposition, boom, straight in the shoulder, go, done. Step back, did it work? I don't care if it grazed him or wounded him or hurt their pride. That's an effect on an entire team. If you get multiple people doing that to an entire unit and you can have an effect on them, you can start winning the tide of a war. We get to practice that. We get to learn that and get to see where our techniques fit in that. Even foam sticks, fiberglass and foam sticks can have a lot more violence to overcome and more variables to be concerned about, especially pike formations. I've gotten to experience being the nutcase Lanchkanet with a flamberge binding up 5 or 6 pikes in one swing to hope my friends can stop the shields that were going to use that potential damage as cover to encroach forwards. And my friends were able to deal with them as I'm screaming, I will keep you safe if you keep me safe. That's just an overbind with like, I'm going to put this in the dirt. That doesn't have an effect on someone, but it has an effect on a war. It has an effect on a fight. Power of friendship, woo! And you get to see where that is like, why would I ever just overbind into the dirt? Here, this is the context. Keep your friends safe. More important than killing. And through that violence, sometimes what shouldn't have worked, what should have worked didn't. And you either keep going or you get to reflect on it in the afterlife. Something you need to act accordingly towards over and over and over for hours, depending on your game. Sometimes you make a mistake, but if you don't keep going after that single mistake, worse can happen to you and your friends. And how you approach that situation is a very important thing, especially for what techniques and tactics you employ. Various renditions of different matchups of weapons and a constant balance of conservative enough not to die, but aggressive enough to not just be running away. And you get to practice a lot of the most primal reactions, where you will always be surprised at what people try, instead of how spoiled we are with how skillful our friends can be. There shouldn't be as much difference between LARP and HEMA as we kind of put there. We're pretending our steel swords are hurting each other in particular situations to try and make techniques work and to admit there's stopping power. And that's okay. We're playing with swords. We get to play with swords. Like that same wonderment we had as children. The same wonderment I had when I ran around with a toy katana and cut up the Agapanthers. Like, we don't get to lose that just because we want to take it seriously. LARP is really useful for all of us who practice these games and practice these plays, because it is a quite realistic way to apply what we learn. And we also get to practice under different rule sets and different stimulus. Most HEMA tournaments are different rules, different fencing required, different approaches required. We all know how to turn our entire game plan into a whole wheel of camembert cheese. You can do that in LARP too. It's a fun exercise. And you get to see which techniques are applicable to different physics and even as close to real physics as possible. We still become amazing and accomplished in both hobbies. But we shouldn't forget we are playing with swords, and that's really amazing. And all opportunities to play with swords should be treated like such. I hope people want to come play Wacky Bats now. That's everything I had to say. Have I ever dealt with mounted opponents or fought from horseback for that matter? No. Just because horses are spooky. I grew up with horses and stuff, and like people can also be duffers. So sadly, I haven't gotten to do that. Do we allow thrusts in our LARP rules? And if not, how do you deal with the problem of not being able to keep distance at the threat of the point? So I'm very lucky that almost all the games I've played, we can thrust with weapons that have been designed to absorb decent impact. I know there are plenty of events that don't do such. You would have to mutate your movements ever so slightly, or sabers are sick for that because you can just threaten with the curved edge in the same way as you would threaten with the point. Like you make concessions and edits due to the physics of that world. If that world doesn't have apparently force through a small area doesn't work, you just make slight edits and that's fine. I think the idea of HEMA being a fencing laboratory, gives personal physical insight what it actually was. This talk makes me realize that context shows that exercise we're actually academic exercise, right? Mounted, everything is better with blades. I have, if you're interested. So Gareth, if you want to talk about mounted combat, like go for it because that's great. Yeah, do it. Mobile high ground. That's spooky.
Yeah, if you want, I can talk about horses. It's I'll keep it really brief because I don't want to take over this thing, but horses are fascinating. To me, there's two things about it. The first is that it adds an incredible amount of power to basic techniques. The first time I played with horses, I was standing there and I was wearing a steel breastplate, and a chap was on a charger and cantered past and smashed me with a sword, and it took me off the ground, and I sort of went a little bit flying and smashed down. So there's a lot of power behind the things. The other thing about horses I find is that it makes German longsword, that Lichtenauer business, makes sense because there's only going forward. Because unlike a human, horses only go in one direction. They don't turn that fast. So the techniques that go forward in sort of a cone of thing make a lot of sense. And that's about all I'm going to say about that. Horses are amazing. Also, like battlefield mobility is just unbelievable.
Disgusting.
You're looking way over there, there's some troops, and then you fight some dudes and you look and suddenly they're charging you. You know it's amazing. But I don't want to get into too much because I don't want to steal the focus. Also, I feel like Mark is gonna say
also done it. That's great.
So I'm done with that.
I think the insight about Lichtenauer is very good, in that you can be 100% guaranteed there's going to be a bind. You can be 100% guaranteed that there's going to be a bind one way or other. Or it's not. Literally, the pass is going to be too far away to bind, and you're going to do it again the next time. So in terms of that hit and miss, I think you're 100% spot on there, Gareth. Just on the horses, look, horses can move sideways, upside down. They're insane creatures. And they do so in a really unpredictable way. So yeah, there's almost no search statement you can make that saying horses can't do this. That hasn't been contradicted dozens of times by anyone dealing with horses. Yeah. But no, I don't think I need to add anything else because I thought the points Gareth made was really good.
Does anyone have any queries, questions, anything like that? This is the time that we can start like kind of unmuting because like I've had everything I've had to say and I'd rather just discuss everything from this point on.
May I ask a question?
Go for it.
Can you expand on how you think LARP teaches asymmetric fighting?
The best way to learn things is by doing it. You're kind of just stuck in these positions where it's, all right, how do I overcome this problem that's in front of me, opposed to kind of contemplating it over and over and over and kind of goofing around with it. It's, this situation is make or break for X, Y, and Z reasons. What can I apply to this situation? And troubleshooting under high intensity, which is something that we don't get to practice too much with asymmetric situations because it's a novelty in HEMA. Effective. Can I talk about the effect of armor in LARP and HEMA? So, armor in HEMA is great because it keeps us safe. That's amazing. Not getting injured is great. Armor in LARP stops our character from getting injured, keeps them safe. And depending on the physics of the world, it works very well or kind of. So you kind of start changing your techniques depending on the physics of that world. Like if the armor works kind of, void steps and breaking distance and taking whatever hits you can on them, it just becomes boss vector where you're pretty sure your sword is quite blunt and made of gelatin. And you're just hoping for something to actually stick eventually. And sometimes it becomes weird harness vector, where you're like, I need to do things to stop your armor being useful. Bicoline in Canada is really good for that because if you get hit in an unarmored spot, you lose that limb. Everything after that moment kind of gets a bit goopy and a bit larpy, but like the fencing to the point of my armor kind of works for a few hits, but it only works where my armor is. Where some games are like, oh, you're wearing armor, you have X amount of health, which really just becomes Mosh Hewson with bigger hitboxes if you want more health. Big shoulders look sick. They're also really easy to tee you off on. Are you okay with me asking for a donation in the Facebook group? Yes, it's for your. I read that out loud when it was meant to be a private message.
Okay, well, all right, yeah. So I was just going to ask in the Facebook event. I wasn't actually going to mention here, but yeah. We're trying to keep everything as free as we can, especially because everyone's going mad from COVID. But the Old Sword Club does have a few small running costs. So yeah, if you want, we've got a PayPal donation button in the Facebook event if you did want to donate some money. But yeah, like I said, these are free events because we do them to help, because they're good for people, and it's good to kind of come together and talk about swords. But yeah, if you want to donate as well. I'm really bad at asking for money. I'm just going to mute myself completely now, and everyone pay attention to Mosh.
Support your local sword school. There's only a few of us, and we want more of them, and we want them to still be there when everything can kind of be normal. I mean, I do anyway. All right. Any queries? Any statements? Any thoughts? Any moments of other people like learning things through LARP?
I've got one. Someone from outside both worlds who only just really jumped into all this through Tim's online. From the outside looking in HEMA with blunt steel weapons, the chance of getting hurt is greater than would be in LARP. I don't know if that's not. That's the basis of where I'm coming from for this question. Do you then find with LARP you are able to use a greater variety of techniques because there is a greater freedom from being hurt and you are able to try different things?
There's just different things that can kind of go wrong. Like, funnily enough, one of the best things about being safe in LARP is that almost all injuries are caused by gravity and fighting in dumb places.
Right.
Falling over. Yeah, Chris, thank you. Exactly what Chris had.
Yeah, but does that still then allow you to try different things?
Right.
If
you do get to try other things without needing to stress about injuring your hand. Also in HEMA, if you've got very good equipment, your opportunities to raise intensity and do special things definitely does go up. But like to be able to go quite intense safely from the get-go, LARP definitely has that. Unless you can afford to just drop about like a couple of $100 on good equipment. Oh yeah, so David, he fights with a banner and broadsword constantly. That's hilarious. And it's just like a crazy buckler. Worst LARP injury came from tripping and jumping over a fence, and poor Elliot does get hit in the eyes a lot. So a lot of LARPs don't allow striking to the head. So you do need to sometimes mutate your techniques due to that. Also getting hit in the face sucks when you don't have equipment. So like a lot of the time that's not there. Some LARPs actually allow it, but it really depends. And like some techniques do mutate accordingly. From walking into trees later, yeah. Tents are the devil. Modern tents are worse than period tents for trying to get through a camp. That is a massive lesson to be learned real quick. If your friends all have period tents, there's so many less ropes that seem to be 40 meters away from the tent itself. Sorry. It's really important to find out real quick. Anyone else? Feel free to unmute yourself and talk. And this is like discussion-y time. Also, if you're waving or trying to get my attention in any way, I can only see 5 people at a time. That's a lot of people.
But the weight of the weapons that you're using.
Yes. Sorry. Can everyone hear me? Yep. What's really cool is that like my favorite broadsword weighs 600 grams, but is weighted like a mace. It sucks. Like it's super like let's have a gaze at this. But where's my point of balance? Like if I had a steel with a point of balance like this, I wouldn't be allowed to compete with it. It's like a cavalry saber, and this is weighted well for a sword. My other broads, I like broadswords because like you learn how important baskets are on a battlefield opposed to fencing, where like you can get away with smaller hand protection. I just need the biggest cone of defense I can 90% of the time because I'm never exactly on midline because I've got to deal with 50 midlines at any time or center lines. This is like a disgustingly good sword, and this is like it for point of balance. But because it's like super, like it's got a lot of mass here, it's disgusting. I think this is only like 550 grams or something like that. So you get to have a greater volume of sparring. You get to have a greater volume of training. And you also get to develop some disgusting hand speed, which a lot of people can like get by on for years. And then if you tighten up the hand speed, you get monsters.
But
yeah, go for it. Yeah,
that's a problem for me because like when you've got a weapon which has got more inertia behind it, you can't swing it around as fast.
Right. And that is a trap for a lot of people. It's a trap for people trying to be better HEMAists if they really enjoy LARP, because you can get away with particular things for quite a while. But a lot of the higher end stuff really does shine no matter how fast it is. There's a reason why like Olympic Saber still does at least decent swordplay, even though it's kind of weird. I know, I really like Olympic Saber. Like coming from HEMA, like I never did Olympic Saber. I just think it's great. But there's still a lot of like when you're dealing with people of equal speed of weapons, tighter, more efficient movements will always beat hand speed velocity in just fitness. So you don't lose it as much as, I mean, it's not as noticeable in LARP as it is with steel swords, but you don't lose it as much. Oh, Elliot mentions a really good point. You get to swing a big weapon around when your body may not be ready for it. Now, like, pros and cons with that, you should learn good technique. But also, if you're physically unable to move the weapon, you kind of don't want to, because that just sucks for so much longer. Getting people playing with swords and becoming passionate about it, they'll fix their shortcomings eventually. But if there's if there's barriers and stuff, LARP's really good for overcoming barriers real quick. Jess, do you want to talk about hanging or garden again?
Why would you like me to? Or did
I don't know. I think Mick asked.
What
who
why I would
asked?
like to is because it was a little bit quick for us old blokes that
I'm
don't.
out of the way. I'll clear the camera.
I'm just interested because Tim also has something about it. I just want to see. I just really didn't quite get what you did.
Okay, so stand up with a bit of a sword. These are being repaired at the moment. So guardant is with your hand above your head and the point back towards your left, your not sword knee, other knee. Often it's thought of as being defensive, but when you're on a battlefield, it's great for just going forward. What I showed on camera before, sorry, that's what Mosh was saying, was how to be sudden. Sorry, I'm trying to get the angle right with the camera. So normally if you've got your hand up and you're just facing one person, where this arm is doesn't matter so much, but by I've thought hard about how to explain this to other people. If I say move your arm back, it moves back like this much, but if you say retract the shoulder blade, suddenly I can see, and so I'm not limiting my peripheral vision, and my hand doesn't move. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. Thank you so much.
If I can just add one thing, Jess is extremely clean at this particular fight. So listen to what she has to say.
Thanks.
She also has far more flexible shoulders than some of us as well.
Well, that true that.
Yeah.
Also on that, women have less upper body strength, so we will tire through the shoulders faster. So maintaining correct position is often necessary. Because if I'm not like through continuing, a LARP will require me to do hold a position for longer than the 2 minutes or half hour that we would have in training. So just through repetition and being forced through a position, it will, positions are often self-correcting in that, like, if you need to maintain it, you have to do it properly. So LARP's great for forcing technique to improve. In many different techniques, it can give you bad habits, but for open, where the sword is above you, it becomes a resting technique, like guard. When I'm tired, I'll stick my sword above me because I can sink the weight through my shoulder and it's quite restful compared to having a sword in front.
But it also makes sense for multiple opponents, which is probably more important.
Yes.
Thank you.
Gareth, do you want to answer the question with, because I know you know Silver better than me, I would hope. Isn't one of Silver's paradoxes that defensive guards are good for offense and offensive guards are good for defense?
Good question, Tim. But I think that's a slight. I think it's asking it in a slightly tricky fashion. The more I read into Silver, the more I think that he has so much implicit information in that book or two that he's written that it's really easy to understand at a superficial level, but I think he implicitly describes so much more. And I think that the concept for silver of defensive guards and offensive guards is a little bit false, because in the way that I read it, there's no real difference. There's lyings, which are these positions that you'll take, and part of that has a sort of a philosophical mindset to it, whether I'm in an aggressive fight or a defensive fight or whatnot. But it's not that the position is intrinsically defensive or offensive either. What I tend to think is that silver's fights are balanced in an offensive and defensive fashion, such that when you find yourself on a battlefield and you're surprised either in a situation where you couldn't suddenly attack, or you're surprised when you're suddenly in a situation where you need to defend yourself, they're sort of equally good. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So it's sort of, yeah, I guess a lot more complicated than just, yeah, sort of simple, you know, oh, you're in this guard for exactly this purpose and this guard for this purpose. Yeah.
Right. The way I read silver is you never take a guard or a position for exactly this purpose, because you're never in exactly that situation. You know, I mean, fights are messy things, and battlefields particularly are very messy things, especially when it gets asymmetric and there's different numbers of people and you're fighting different numbers of people with different combinations of weapons and so on. And so you're never taking a position for exactly these reasons. It's more that you'll take a position or a guard or a lying or a fight for certain advantages and or to offset certain disadvantages. And to put you in a position where you can act or react in a safer fashion, essentially.
Okay. Yeah, sort of a bit more complicated. I guess that also, I know one thing I've noticed doing 19th century stuff, which is, I think a lot easier to interpret, because the mindset of people in the 19th century is a lot more similar to what is today. There's you sort of have to balance the need to balance between, you know, what's written and what you sort of extrapolate from that. So yeah, it's sort of, I guess it's very, very sort of interesting kind of thing to work through. Cool. Yeah, so sort of wrapping up. I guess I should probably check out, are there any more questions, or alternatively, does anyone else have like a story from using HEMA techniques and LARP or something similar that they want to share? Before we sort of finish up for the evening.
Because there are definitely people who are watching that can have definitely got things to advise. If they want to jump in. I don't want to volunteer anyone, because that's mean.
I just want to say one thing, which is that I think that Mosh's point that LARP giving the opportunity to understand the application of HEMA techniques, or as you put it, you know, how it works against white belts, I think is a really valuable lesson, because I think in Sal play and in our tournaments, we're in a very weird and synthetic situation where everybody is kind of a master, and every time we have a fight, it's strictly just the two of us, and we've always got matched weapons. And so I think the points that Mosh was making about how this works in a battlefield is a really valuable point.
Yeah, I guess just echo that. Yeah, one of the things I found really challenging when I first started doing started doing sword fighting, because at a university-based group, was dealing with beginners, because they did just very strange things, and I had no idea how to cope. So yeah, sort of, it's very, like, I think it's actually a very valuable skill. Also, to agree with Mosh and Gareth. I think we're just finishing up because a few people have had to duck off, but Cyan did have a question.
One thing to kind of mention with that quickly. There's a thing which is I think it's in Henry Angelo's Broadsword and Saber and his 10 lessons. I think it's in the 3rd or 4th play in that, where it's sit open, like with your point kind of open with your broadsword or saber, and then fight the cut towards you. It's become one of my favorite like anti-suicidal duffer tools, and you can just do it to even competent fencers, of just catching their weapon on your strong, keep going through, keep pushing through, circle right round, big cross step over straight into their legs, and then you either cut straight into the back of their leg, into their thigh, or you bash their sword against their leg while you do that. And it's the funniest thing in the world. And like all these things of like practicing these anti-duffer techniques, you just have to get really good at real quick. I forgot to mention that one because like that was a great one. I will go back up to just these questions very quickly. So going to ask this one again for visibility. Yep. You've spoken a lot about situations where the allies or friends have done the correct thing. How does it help hinder your learning where your allies don't behave correctly? Yeah, right. I've got an actual problem with my fencing where I am so much better at dealing with people who do the wrong thing than the right thing. It's why I like have a struggle against like very learned fencers, because I'm like, okay, I am exceptional at abusing mistakes and you've got none. Sick. So those are really like, I at least have that, and then I go against other people and it's just like, oh, cool, you know what you're doing. So that does hinder you a bit, because you feel very comfortable taking on 1 to 20 people and not care because you can just mince through them. But you get bad at boss battles all of a sudden. So also still practicing that if that's a thing you need to worry about. In the 10 example, any other modern items to avoid or stick to period versions? Don't have your phone in your pocket. Don't have your keys in your pocket. Put things where it should be safe. Speak to reenactors. They're also really good at this. But LARPers in particular, because like things that can break, you will suddenly be in violence, where at least reenactment, they can kind of get away with it. Like, oh no, we have when we're going to be in violence. Gareth probably knows other things not to have with you at dumb times, because all of a sudden getting accosted skyrockets. Anything else because Gareth's more experienced with that. Any suggestions, Gareth?
No, broadly, I think that's right. I think it's really about just being respectable and playing absolutely above board. Because a couple of times I have been questioned by police, and you know, the best way to deal with it is just to be absolutely above board and have everything in play beforehand. You know, just to be completely open. Don't lie. Don't make tricks. Say, look, here's my cards. Here's the school I work with. You know, stuff like that. Just openness and clarity, I think, is the best.
Kira, with your statement on, thank you so much for that, Gareth. About D&D, I've done 2 D&D sessions my whole life. Like, I just can't sit still that long. And this is so good if you got ADD or you think you do, as everyone thinks I do. Like being able to actually live the things is so much nicer. Yes. Yeah. Like you learn about why particular fabrics be used. That's really useful. Sorry, cyan or cyan, I apologize if I have mispronounced that. Avoid modern fabrics. The traditional fabrics last so much better in terrible weather and keep you warm when soaked through. Yes, those are things you kind of learn real quick when you go to like multiple day events. Which, I mean, you do learn that when you go to a weekend-long seminar and your gambus and your fencing jacket can stand up by the end of it.
Yeah, that's never good.
Yeah.
Smell it. If the next camp over is complaining about the smell, you should have washed it 10 days ago.
Chemical warfare.
Exactly.
I
Something
want to win like that.
something that I feel is worth mentioning is I got into LARP 2 years ago, two and a bit years ago now.
A year and a bit?
A year and a bit, somewhere there.
Yeah.
It's been a wild ride. But that and along at the same time, I've also gone through and picked up a heap of new academic scholarly pursuits with respect to HEMA. So at the same time as coming onto a field of 300 people and having a general shout at you and then charging forward to have some fella with a feather sword twist around you faster than you can blink and then be dropped to your knees and like, oh, okay, so that was quick. And then paralleling that to going into the cell and having a playful bout with a rapierist who knows exactly how and when to stringere you to stick it right between your breastbone. There is so much that you can learn by just chucking yourself into high velocity situations, and all of my best stories have come about of either throwing myself into or bounding head over foot next to all of my friends into high velocity situations in the cell or on the field. So if you're even slightly considering having a go at any sort of wacky bats that aren't your usual flavor, I would absolutely encourage doing that with a heap of friends. All the better. And be prepared to see something you've never seen before and have a grand old time doing it.
Yeah.
May I make a suggestion? Can we perhaps put out a list of HEMA and LARP groups in the various cities? Because there's probably a bunch of people here that are on one side of the fence or other in Sydney or Melbourne or Adelaide or wherever that don't actually know the clubs that are in their neighborhood.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I would suggest everyone just post your groups to the event, like the event page on Facebook. Just be like, this is me. There's maybe like a 1 or 2 sentence summary of what you do. But yeah, that's a fantastic idea, Gareth. Because yeah, like definitely do that.
All right, should we kind of wrap it up there and then just get on the beers?
Here's our civic duty.
Thing to say about from HEMA to LARP.
I've been on the beers. When were we not on the beers?
Yeah.
Less.
Just
Cool,
one
no.
thing to say about coming from HEMA to LARP is whichever group you're going into, it can be a good idea to find someone to help calibrate like hit strength. Trading blows with someone will give you a good idea of what's acceptable and also what hits should count. Like depending on the different games or the different cultures of the games, they're a lot harder or lighter, and you don't know until you've calibrated with the people who are there on the ground.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no, I would actually suggest that's also true of going between any different groups.
Yeah.
I know back when I ran a reenactment group, I had huge problems with reenactors from other groups coming in, and it just didn't click that our safety rules were different. And like that caused all manner of problems, from like basic stuff like people ignoring forearm hits to in one case a guy actually drove a spear thrust into his own face, because what was fine in my group was not at all practice in his group, and he kind of reacted really badly to a spear coming into his upper chest and ended up knocking it into his face. It was a padded spear, so it was fine, like there's no injury.
Mm.
Yeah. Definitely, but I would recommend if you go between any groups, the first thing you should, or one of the first things you should do, certainly before bouting, is just ask them, look, what are your where's your safety at? What are your regular practices? How hard do you go? Because that's, even if it's not causing injuries, it's still just can cause like sort of social problems, I guess. Cool. So we might wrap it up there and just we've sort of gotten to the end of the night. Certainly everyone's welcome to hang around and chat afterwards. Just I need to stop recording it at some time, and it's kind of good to have an ending. First off, like really big thank you to Mosh. You've just been absolutely amazing with everything you've said. It was just it was really wonderful. Kind of hear all your stories and then kind of get your perspective on really a lot of experiences that I don't think I don't think even possible in HEMA in some contexts. Like that idea of spontaneous violence really kind of resonated with me, going, oh wow, like that's that's something that you just wouldn't come up in a HEMA context ever. Thank you. That was really amazing. Like it's been a really amazing talk.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you for inviting me to do this.
Thank you for coming. Cool. So other than that, so next week we've got a similar themed talk with Peter Radvan, and he's talking about what metal weapons reenactment can teach HEMA. So kind of he's going to be talking about similar sort of thing, but like his experiences as a HEMA practitioner doing metal weapons reenactment, which is going to be really, really cool. For those of you in sort of Sydney, New South Walesy area, or anyone who can kind of get to the mountains, we're also the Old Sword Club is finally meeting up after like nearly a year this Saturday to do some bouting and now a lesson, given that I've had a lot of responses to my post asking if people wanted a lesson, and everyone said they wanted one. So there will be a
That's so good.
less as well. And other than that, I'm going to stop recording. Everyone's welcome to just kind of hang around and chat, because this is a social thing as well, because I think otherwise we would just go mad with COVID. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.